see what you're trying to do, FIA.
You're trying to woo us. There's been so much going on lately that I've had little time to cover this, but the FIA and Andretti saga is getting more and more ridiculous. Almost to the point where I feel like the FIA and Formula One are actually on a collision course. Basically descending to an all-out brouhaha, only without the laughs and hardly any of the brew. So if you're not quite familiar with the situation, I made this video a couple of weeks back about Andretti's situation in Formula One, now it's been approved by the FIA, which you can take a look at for the full details. But needless to say, I think I'm beginning to see a pattern here. I feel like the FIA is trying to play themselves out as the good guys following the rules, and then turning the Formula One commercial side of things, the Formula One management and Stefano Domenicali department, into the bad guys, the evil, greedy empire that is trying to deny the public about what they want. They've got to have money, because they're so worried about losing their precious prize money. Don't feel too bad for them though. The idea of them losing money actually is a little bit of a fib, especially if you look back a few years. According to the Financial Mirror, who also sourced Liberty Media's own data, in the past 7 years, the prize pot has actually grown from $966 million to an estimated $2.2 billion for 2023. That is an increase of 220% since Haas joined Formula One in 2016, just before Liberty Media took over from Bernie Ecclestone, who has pretty much escaped jail, even though he's actually been liable for tax evasion, but that's a whole other story. The Formula One prize pot is the biggest in the entire sporting world. Sure, you might wish to argue that developing cars and paying staff costs a lot of money, as well as paying the drivers and all of that, but what about those crazy football transfer fees that happen all the time? Sometimes players go for hundreds of millions of dollars. The UEFA Champions League prize pot is still smaller than Formula One's, not by much, but there's about 10% difference. And you know that with Formula One, it's only going to get bigger. And most of that growth actually has stemmed in the last 2 years, because from 2021, it's about 1.3. It's now grown to nearly double that in 24 months. So honestly, I feel like the teams are being greedy because the proportion has actually grown considerably. And then you get the likes of Christian Horner saying back last year that most Formula One teams are doing great, that there's no financial worries at all. He said that the prize money for F1 teams, at least the big ones, exceeds the cost cap, and it doesn't make any sense about why that's the case. It means that most of the teams get more prize money in theory than they need. And even the smaller ones get about 70 to 80% from the actual prize pot. So as far as Horner's concerned, he's not worried about Red Bull's bottom line at all. So what's the worry here? You feel like, actually, these teams are actually getting more money than they ever had. You get Alpine posting a profit despite their woes in Formula One. You get more teams, including Williams, earning more revenue, their financial hardship slowly diminishing. Like I said, I know that Williams and Haas, they seem to be the more financially unstable teams, but Haas has now finally reached the cost cap threshold. They now earn enough money to be able to actually develop to their fullest potential. So Haas's future is actually the most stable it's ever been, despite their rocky relationship with sponsors, as you all know. James Vowles of Williams has said that the pie has got to grow as a result of an 11th team coming, not shrinking. Well, James, what's the prize pot been doing for the last few years? Has it been sitting idle? It's grown by nearly double in terms of what you actually earned before. Back in the day, Formula One teams going under and having financial issues, it was pretty common. A lot of teams kept talking about that, money situation is really bad, we could go under at any moment. We don't really get that anymore because Formula One is in rude health, especially according to Christian Horner, who does talk with the rest of the team principals, and as far as he's concerned, everything is fine, and there's nothing to worry about. So to me, the whole thing about losing prize money, it's completely moot. It's not going to be a problem. All of this song and dance about money is just the big Formula One teams dancing around the fire, just going, we want more money! And then the FIA and Formula One, they'll come to some sort of arrangement with Andretti, and then it'll all be swept under the carpet. But at the same time, I think what the FIA is doing is fascinating. Lately, its president Ben Sulayem has been relatively quiet since he vowed to step back from daily affairs with Formula One after he got his nose stuck into too many affairs, focusing on the FIA as a whole. But in the past few weeks, he's been saying stuff which has not only been not hated by the Formula One community, but actually making a lot of sense. It seems to be more in line with what the public actually want. When the FIA approved Andretti, Ben Sulayem was touting the fact that the FIA had taken every single step to make sure Andretti Global could handle being in Formula One and it passed all of the tests. The FIA also said that it followed all the protocols that it was expected of, especially EU directives, saying, we're doing our part, we followed every single letter of the rules, and we are just making sure that we are being responsible. Now it's up to the commercial side of things to sort out from their end, but as far as we're concerned, we've done everything proper, so the ball's in your court, Stefano. Oh, that's so sneaky. I see what the FIA is doing. After the last couple of years with the FIA being slammed for absolutely everything, this is them now going on a positive campaign to make the fans turn to them and go like, wow, the FIA is actually thinking of Formula One's best interests. And, what are you doing? You're just all about money. Especially when the FIA president decided to drop the bombshell of unnamed figures in Formula One wanting General Motors, instead of going with Andretti, to buy out an existing team. Getting Ben Sulayem to go to General Motors and go like, hey, instead of going with Andretti, how about you back up another team, like maybe Williams perhaps, or Alpine, or I don't know. I'm not talking about specific teams. It's just there for just for the gags. But Mr. Sulayem did elaborate when he was talking with Reuters. You cannot force Andretti GM to buy another team just because they, the owners, want to sell. I won't mention names, but they were after me to go on and convince GM to do that. It's not my job. I was not elected to do that. I am not a broker. Well, that's quite right, Ben. You're not the broker. That isn't your job. But what is he trying to gain from all of this? Bravado. He wants another American team in Formula One with an American engine manufacturer, as well as maybe a Chinese team in there for good measure, as he was saying further on in his comments, to fill out the grid with 12 teams, as is possible by the current Concorde Agreement. And then when other teams are complaining that, oh, there might not be enough room at the tracks for an 11th or 12th team, well, he then even brings up the whole unnamed Formula One movie for Apple TV with that Apex team that we saw recording at Silverstone, saying, well, in that movie, we've got 11 teams, and that worked out just fine. Of course, they weren't actually racing 11 teams, but there was another garage for an 11th team, and that was made up. And you just feel like, well, you've done it. And actually, 12 teams is the maximum the Concorde Agreement can actually accommodate. So as far as Mr. Sulayem's talking about is saying, if people watch that movie and they see 11 teams, and then they decide to go and watch a Formula One race and they see only 10 teams, they'll be like, what? I mean, okay, that's a little bit condescending and actually a little bit mocking of people's intelligence, but, you know, he's just trying to make a comparison. And according to Mr. Sulayem, circuits in F1 are supposed to have room for 12 teams, which then leads on to another seemingly popular take of his. We need more teams and fewer races. What? What? He's talking sense. What wisdom is this man saying? Going against the party line of Formula One management and Stefano, who want more races and no more teams apparently. This is clearly the strongest example of the FIA president trying to sway public favour to him and against the commercial side, making them out to be the baddies. He then talked about another big bugbear with the fans. Track limits and how ridiculous they've become. To be fair, it is a little bit of a selfish thing because he doesn't like the fact that the FIA looks bad because they can't handle all the track limit violations, with Austria having over 1,200 of those. Qatar was slightly better. They were able to process them faster, but it was still a little bit tricky. So he wants tracks to be able to handle the situation themselves instead of the FIA doing it, because there's so much they can do. So tracks like Austria and Qatar, according to Mr. Sulayem, could be finding themselves not on the Formula One calendar because they're not doing enough, in theory, to deal with track limits. The Red Bull Ring has actually discussed with the FIA about maybe removing the tarmac at the final corner and putting in a gravel trap to try and discourage people from going wide at the last corner. So that is something. Just put in more gravel traps. That tarmac may look really pretty and you could put the Austrian flag on it, but drivers are actually going to push themselves. But if they know there's a gravel trap there, that's bad. You don't want to go on there. That is bad, especially for the floors these days. Track limits are not something fans like, nor do the drivers, but the rules are quite clear at the same time at least. If you take all four wheels off of the grey stuff, you lose. That is fair. In Qatar, actually had a good idea by, at the end of the track limits, when they actually started going over the limit, they did have that little dip of about 5 centimeters. So that means the drivers can actually figure out for themselves about the feel, about, okay, that's over the edge. But then the track organizers didn't talk to Pirelli about that. That got them in a tears, and then we had that mandated 18-lap stint for the actual race because they weren't quite sure about the safety of those curbs, and then they had to adapt it. And then, yeah, it was a nice idea, but they didn't talk to the right people. And the FIA wanting to have less races, that is actually something the fans want, because in theory, you think, oh great, 24 races. Well, That does take a lot of time out of your social life, I will admit. And maybe 24 is way too much, especially for the people working in Formula One, being away from their families and their homes. You just feel like maybe 20 races would be enough? That would be acceptable. And that's still quite a lot from what we used to have back in the day. Like, used to be 16 back in the 2000s? I'll leave a pinned comment below with 2 options and you can just like the one you prefer. The Andretti situation is just the biggest catalyst for all of this friction between the two parties, especially when you hear about that supposed Renault engine deal with Alpine that Andretti had. Well, that's fallen through, and do you want to know why? It had something to do with contracts. Man, what is Alpine doing? They do not know how to write contracts, seriously! Andretti didn't actually sort out a date of actually signing into Formula One and competing before a specific date. If they actually do want to commit to having engines from Renault, they actually now have to sign a full contract, and that can be done, but they can't do this pre-contract and just pre-term, so it actually has to be you either sign a contract or you don't. And then you hear that thing from Mr. Sulayem that some teams want General Motors to come in, not with Andretti, but with another team that currently exists. But you really think that General Motors is going to drop maybe $1 billion to buy out another team? I don't think they would want to actually put in the cash for that, when they could probably put in half that, maybe even less, to fund an Andretti commitment, because Andretti, they would have the wherewithal to do it themselves, and then General Motors can just help back them up a little bit. Honestly, you could do that back in the day. People buying out other teams, that was pretty common when things were cheaper and Formula One wasn't as big. Nowadays, that's practically impossible, because the owner of Rodin Cars, having not been successful with his own bid to make a Formula One team of his own, he actually approached AlphaTauri and they said, "You can have our team for $900 million. And yeah, the boss decided to say no to that and was very annoyed by it. This just feels like Formula One and the FIA are at loggerheads with one another. They are trying to convince the public that they have the best interests of Formula One at heart, and the other ones, they haven't got a clue. The teams are circling around because, well, they like it the way it is right now. They don't want the prize pot being diminished, even though it's actually grown exponentially in just the last couple of years. So all that stuff about money, this is just completely farcical in my opinion. They will sort this out with Andretti, the FIA and Formula One management, but it's going to take a very long time to do that. Maybe actually going past 2025 when Andretti ideally wants to join the sport, and past the next Concorde Agreement when they will have to fork over maybe $600 million for the anti-dilution fee instead of $200 million. So if they do that, I think the teams are going to get a big backlash about saying, "You're just thinking about money, aren't you?" It's all about money. And it also feels like Formula One is messing up other things at the moment. You can watch this video next about why the ideas of 2022 might not be working out as well as Formula One wanted them to.